In the archives of Florence, a single name was erased from history: Girolamo di Rossi, the Medici's secret alchemist. His sin was not in creating gold, but in falling in love with a forbidden woman whose touch blurred science and sacrilege. Together, they sought eternity through mercury and blood, and unleashed a curse that outlived their bodies. This is not a legend. It's a record of desire that tried to conquer death and succeeded too well. Florence, 1487. The air above Via della Scala shimmered with the scent of metal and burning resin. Behind a shuttered window, Girolamo di Rossi worked by candlelight, an alchemist not of superstition, but of science so forbidden it bordered on heresy. He served under the Medici court, where wealth and faith wrestled daily for dominance. To most, he was a craftsman of pigments and medicines. To a select few, he was the man who tried to bind the soul within gold. The chamber he worked in was a labyrinth of glass and smoke. Crucibles hissed. Mercury rolled like liquid mirrors over his gloved hands. He recorded every vapor, every pulse of reaction, in Latin notes bound by a leather strap. His obsession was not wealth, but the ancient promise whispered by Arab scholars: vita longa, the long life that could defy decay. On a rain-heavy evening, as thunder crawled over the city, a visitor arrived. Isabella d'Aragona, cousin to the Duke's wife, draped in mourning black though no one had died. She entered without permission, claiming curiosity about his distillations for her husband's ailments. But her eyes betrayed something else, the restless spark of a mind caged by nobility. Girolamo bowed slightly. "My lady, this is no art for courtly amusement." "And yet," she said, touching the edge of a beaker, "you make the impossible look beautiful." Their first exchange lasted minutes. Their silence afterward lasted weeks. But she returned, each time under different pretenses: a new ailment, a forgotten vial, a sudden fascination with the stars. Soon, her presence became as constant as the smoke that veiled his laboratory. The bond between them formed not through touch but through understanding. Isabella, fluent in Latin and forbidden texts, read aloud from Avicenna and Hermes Trismegistus while Girolamo mixed tinctures that glowed like dusk. Theirs was a language of intellect, of danger, for in Florence, knowledge could condemn faster than sin. She learned to measure mercury, to heat gold leaf until it vanished into vapor. Each experiment drew them closer to something neither could name. At first, it was curiosity, then admiration, then the quiet intoxication of shared secrecy. When she laughed, the sound cracked his composure more than any flame. When he handed her a vial, their fingers brushed, just enough to leave an invisible scar of longing. That night, Girolamo began to dream of her voice echoing through his alembics, of her eyes shimmering through the glass. He told himself it was fascination, not love. A man of reason does not fall. But each morning, when she entered with the scent of violets and rain, his conviction dissolved like silver in acid. Florence spoke in whispers. Servants saw candles burning in the alchemist's room past midnight, two silhouettes moving as one. The church called alchemy the cousin of witchcraft. The court called it an indulgence. Yet both feared it, for it dared to imitate God. Girolamo and Isabella did not fear. They believed the divine could be distilled, bottled, and perhaps, if shared, eternal. In the fumes of mercury, love took its first breath. But in Florence, every breath came at a price. By the spring of 1488, the air in Girolamo's chamber had grown heavy with heat and secrecy. The Medici banner still hung proudly above Florence, but within the alchemist's laboratory, a more dangerous emblem had been born: the pursuit of immortality through love. Girolamo called it elixir vitae, the elixir of life, though its color was closer to blood than gold. He believed that the soul, being divine, could not perish if anchored within a perfect vessel. Mercury was his key, gold his conduit, and Isabella his muse, or perhaps his victim. Their work began with whispers and ended in gasps. Isabella would sit upon a carved stool, her gown sleeves rolled to the elbow, while Girolamo mixed the base, crushed herbs from Venice, powdered amber, fragments of coral, and drops of her own blood. He claimed the body's essence must recognize itself in the potion to take root. When the first vial was ready, she hesitated only a moment. The air smelled of metal and roses as she drank. It burned like ice sliding down her throat. Girolamo's eyes did not leave her, not from desire, but from dread. Her lips parted in a faint sigh. "It tastes," she said, "like longing." The effect was not immediate, but something in her changed. Her skin glowed faintly in lamplight, her pulse slow yet strong. When she slept, her dreams were vivid, rivers of molten silver, the alchemist's voice calling her from within them. She began to crave the draught not for youth, but for closeness, as if each drop bound her further to him. Girolamo, intoxicated by success and guilt alike, deepened his studies. He wrote that the elixir awakened not only vitality but emotion, that its perfection might purify both flesh and soul. Yet when he touched Isabella's hand, he trembled. Science had become worship. They no longer distinguished between experiment and affection. His instruments became altars. Her veins, the scripture of his heresy. Sometimes he would trace the faint silver scars on her wrists, marks left by mercury exposure, and whisper apologies that sounded like prayers. Outside their world of fumes and glass, Florence whispered louder. Courtiers gossiped that Lady Isabella had fallen under a strange charm. Her cheeks flushed though she grew thin. Her laughter was sweeter, her temper quicker. A rumor spread that she had found a new physician who could grant eternal beauty. The church took note. At night, when thunder cracked over the Arno, Isabella pressed herself to Girolamo's chest, her heartbeat echoing like a distant drum. "If this is sin," she whispered, "then let us never be forgiven." He wanted to stop, but she asked for more, not from vanity, but from hunger. Each vial she drank made her less human, more radiant, as though light had replaced her blood. When she kissed him, her lips left the taste of iron. The line between devotion and decay vanished. Girolamo began to fear what he had created. In his journal he wrote, "The elixir awakens desire not of the body, but of the soul, a thirst that can never be quenched." Florence soon gave them names, the Duchess of Mercury and her devil alchemist. And beneath the marble ceilings of the Medici court, whispers turned to watchful eyes. The elixir had given them life, yes, but it had also given them away. By midsummer, Florence had grown restless with rumor. The Medici court, ever a theater of envy and devotion, whispered now of poison, of witchcraft, and of a noblewoman whose beauty seemed to resist time. In the narrow streets, merchants spoke her name with caution, Isabella d'Aragona, and the man said to have stolen her virtue not with lust, but with alchemy. Girolamo di Rossi knew the danger long before the knock came at his door. For weeks, he had seen shadows pausing beneath his window, figures in clerical robes walking too slowly past his workshop. Yet he did not flee. Perhaps he believed knowledge would shield him. Perhaps he had already surrendered to fate. The morning the inquisitors arrived, the city still smelled of rain. 3 men entered, their black robes damp, their eyes colder than the instruments on his table. Behind them stood a Medici steward, expression unreadable. They said they came in the name of purity, to ensure no unholy practices stained the family's reputation. Girolamo bowed, as courtesy demanded, though his heart thundered in his chest. "You will find only medicine and pigment, my lords." They found more. The search was slow, deliberate. Vials were lifted to candlelight, notebooks unrolled, crucibles scraped clean. The youngest inquisitor sniffed at a flask and recoiled, muttering of brimstone. The eldest found a page written in cipher, a formula describing the transmutation of flesh. Girolamo spoke quickly, explaining it was metaphor, philosophical allegory, nothing more. But they were not men who believed in metaphor, Meanwhile, in the courtyard above, Isabella waited, her fingers clenched around a rosary, her pulse betraying the calm on her face. When they summoned her, she entered like a statue given breath. "Lady Isabella," the steward said softly, "what knowledge do you share with the alchemist?" "Only art," she replied, her voice trembling yet clear. "He prepares pigments for devotional paintings." The lie might have worked, had the inquisitor not noticed the faint silver stains beneath her gloves. Mercury scars. He stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "And do all painters leave such marks, my lady?" She said nothing. Silence in that room was a confession. When they left, Girolamo's hands were shaking. He knew the fresco where his true journals lay hidden, behind the Virgin's robe, painted years before as a cover for secrecy. Inside it slept the record of every sin, the elixir's ingredients, the measurements, the dates she had drunk. He sealed the wall again that night, whispering a prayer to a god who no longer listened. Florence's rumor mills spun faster. The Medici began to distance themselves. At court banquets, Isabella found herself seated further from the ducal table. Servants turned their faces when she passed. Mothers warned their daughters not to look her in the eye, lest the curse of Mercury steal their souls. Girolamo, ever proud, told himself he could bear disgrace. But Isabella, radiant, trembling, and still bound to him, could not. Her isolation grew unbearable, and her beauty, once envied, became a spectacle of dread. The glow that had once enchanted them now seemed unnatural. By autumn, even children whispered her name as though it might summon death. The alchemist's hand had stained not parchment, but flesh, and no amount of gold or prayer could wash it clean. The first signs appeared in whispers, as sickness often does. Isabella's husband, Duke Lorenzo d'Aragona, began to tremble at feasts. His once booming laughter broke into fits of coughing, his goblet spilling wine that looked far too much like blood. Servants said his lips blackened in sleep. Others claimed he woke screaming of rivers of molten gold. Within a week, Florence's nobility spoke the word poison louder than prayer. Girolamo di Rossi was summoned to the palace. The corridors smelled of incense and fear. The duke lay upon silken sheets, eyes glassy, breath shallow. Physicians surrounded him, muttering of humors and divine punishment. When Girolamo entered, they stepped aside, half in respect, half in superstition. "My lord," Girolamo murmured, kneeling beside the bed. "It is not poison but imbalance, the stomach's vapors corrupted. I can treat it." But as he lifted the duke's wrist, he saw the truth. The veins shimmered faintly beneath the skin, as if touched by mercury itself. Girolamo's pulse quickened. He had never treated the duke, yet the symptoms were unmistakable, an overdose of what Isabella had so often consumed. The Duchess stood across the room, her expression carved in marble. "Can he be saved?" she asked, voice steady but hollow. Girolamo hesitated. "Only God knows, my lady." Within 3 nights, the duke's madness began. He tore at his clothes, raving of shining men and liquid suns. His body twisted in seizures until dawn claimed him. When he died, the Medici court fell silent. Not from grief, but from the collective horrified certainty that someone among them had murdered royalty. The physicians performed a dissection, as was custom for suspicious deaths. Beneath candlelight, they opened the corpse and found traces of gold, real gold, woven into the organs like veins of ore. A lesser man might have called it divine punishment. The Medici called it evidence. Rumor raced faster than truth. They said the alchemist had used the duke's body to test his elixirs, that the Duchess herself had brought him poisoned draughts, disguised as medicine, that their sin had been so deep, even heaven refused confession. Girolamo was questioned for days. He denied everything, denied the tinctures, denied the experiments, denied the love that burned through every word he spoke. "My potions are meant to heal," he insisted. They are art, not murder. But Florence had already chosen its villain. His workshop was sealed, his apprentices scattered, and his name whispered alongside devils. The Medici stripped him of court patronage. Isabella retreated to her estate, surrounded by silks and silence. The world she had once ruled with her grace now regarded her as unclean. Her husband's tomb became her prison. She wore mourning not for him, but for the life she had buried beneath the weight of her own hunger. At night she wrote letters to Girolamo that she dared not send, fragments of apology, of defiance, of longing. "If I am cursed," she wrote, "then let it be by your hand, for no holy touch could make me live as you did." In the alleyways, children sang mocking songs about the alchemist and his gilded lover. In the taverns, men claimed they saw the Duke's ghost wander the gardens, his breath reeking of metal. Girolamo's name became a synonym for death. And still, deep within his hidden laboratory, the alchemist worked, not to save himself, but to understand how love had turned to poison. Girolamo di Rossi no longer spoke of immortality. The word itself had soured in his mouth, like mercury on the tongue. The Duke's death had stripped him of patrons, wealth, and reputation, but worse, it had left him with silence. His laboratory, once filled with the hum of ambition, now echoed only with the slow dripping of acid onto glass. He wrote obsessively in the margins of old notebooks. "Gold resists decay. Flesh invites it. If the soul lies between them, where does it dwell?" His handwriting trembled. His thoughts wandered between science and madness. In the city above, Florence celebrated festivals of purity. Priests burned heretical manuscripts in the squares, while Girolamo, hidden underground, burned flesh instead. He believed that within dissolution lay revelation. The human form, reduced to vapor, might reveal what the church refused to see, the residue of the soul. He dissolved small creatures first, mice, sparrows, then once, a severed hand taken from the hospital of the poor. Each experiment ended the same, a faint glimmer of silver rising through the acid like a ghost. He called it the reflection of essence. Isabella found him one night bent over a vat, his eyes red from fumes. The moonlight through the high window cast his shadow across the bubbling glass. "You are destroying yourself," she whispered. He looked up, half smiling. "No, my love. I am becoming eternal." Her heart twisted at the word. She stepped closer, the scent of acid and rose oil mingling in the air. "You seek eternity," she said, "but it will take you first." He reached for her hand. The touch burned, not from heat, but from the thin film of mercury coating his skin. She did not pull away. The pain reminded her she was still alive. They began meeting in secret again. No more courtly disguises, no more pretenses of art. Only two ruined souls, bound by the same sin. Isabella's once bright complexion had paled. Her veins shimmered faintly beneath her skin. Servants whispered she was fading, yet she glowed all the same, like a candle near its end. Girolamo spoke to her of dissolution, of merging completely through the same tinctures that had condemned them. "If the elixir unites body and spirit," he murmured, "then why should we not share one life? One soul?" She should have been horrified. Instead, she kissed him. Their lips met with the taste of iron and ash. In that moment, love and death felt indistinguishable. Night after night, they drank from the same flask, smaller doses, darker mixtures. The elixir no longer healed. It hollowed. It made their bodies ache, their thoughts blur. Yet it bound them together in suffering so intimate, it became sacred. In his final coherent entry, Girolamo wrote, "We dissolve to become whole. The mirror breaks and in its fracture we find eternity." The next day, he smashed the mirrors that lined his laboratory walls. Their shards reflected fragments of his face, scholar, sinner, lover, corpse, all indistinguishable. Isabella wept as she helped sweep the pieces. knowing that the man she loved had become the very thing he once sought to transcend. By winter's end, the alchemist of Florence was no longer feared for his knowledge, but pitied for his madness. Yet even in ruin, his work continued, for love had become his final experiment. The winter of 1489 brought plague back to Florence. It moved like mist through the alleys, silent, unseen, unmerciful. The city's physicians filled their ledgers with the names of the dead, while priests burned incense that could not purify the air. To most, it was divine punishment. To Girolamo di Rossi, it was opportunity. The Medici, desperate to contain hysteria, summoned their former alchemist once more, not as court scientist, but as a tool of necessity. "Examine the bodies," they ordered. "Find the cause." He obeyed, though his purpose was no longer what they imagined. Under the guise of service, Girolamo sought his final proof that life, reduced to its purest substance, could be reclaimed. The first body arrived under moonlight, wrapped in linen. A nobleman, 30 years of age, his flesh already stiff. Girolamo dismissed his assistants, claiming he needed solitude for sanctity of work. When the doors shut, he lit his candles and stared at the corpse as one might gaze at an uncut gem. He whispered to himself, "Gold sleeps within the human form." The scalpel cut cleanly. Steam rose from the open chest. What he sought was not anatomy but essence, the unseen residue of soul that he believed shimmered between death and decay. He placed glass vials beneath the wounds, collecting the fluid that seeped out, viscous and dark. Hours passed. From those vials he distilled vapors into a single droplet of pale gold. It trembled at the bottom of his crucible, the culmination of every sin and dream. It was not medicine. It was revelation. Isabella arrived before dawn, shrouded in a hooded cloak. Her breath misted in the cold. She had heard rumors of his new work and came, as always, not out of wisdom but compulsion. When she saw the body upon the table, her face turned ashen. "What have you done?" she whispered. Girolamo turned to her, his eyes hollow yet luminous. "I have touched the soul, Isabella. I have seen it change form. This is the elixir perfected." She stepped closer, trembling. "You desecrate the dead." "Death is only a door," he said. "We have merely learned how to open it." He handed her a vial, urging her to look. The liquid shimmered like dawn trapped in glass. She wanted to throw it away, to smash every instrument that had enslaved them both, but her fingers would not obey. Instead, she helped him pour the final distillation. Not out of devotion, not even out of belief, but from fear. Fear that if she turned away now, her silence would condemn her more surely than complicity ever could. When the body was returned to the plague pit, no one questioned the missing fluids. Florence was drowning in corpses. One more desecrated noble meant nothing. But to Girolamo, that night marked triumph. To Isabella, it marked the end. She dreamt afterward of hands reaching from acid, of gold blooming beneath her skin. Each morning, her reflection seemed less her own. In his journals, Girolamo wrote, "The divine hides not in heaven, but in the decay of creation." It was a discovery that would damn them both. By the end of that winter, Florence whispered a new rumor, that the alchemist no longer needed living subjects for his experiments, and those who entered his laboratory after dark were never seen again. Florence has always known how to sanctify its sins. When whispers reached the Dominican order about Girolamo di Rossi's unnatural experiments, the church responded not with disbelief, but with hunger. Heresy was a feast that fed faith. Father Manfredi arrived from Bologna in the spring of 1490, thin, severe, his eyes pale as candle wax. He carried no sword, only parchment, a crucifix, and the authority of the Holy Office. His first act was to visit the laboratory of the disgraced alchemist. What he found there was not gold, but silence. Instruments left unwashed, glass vessels clouded with residue that shimmered faintly even in the dark. He lifted one to his nose and recoiled. "Mercury," he muttered. "The devil's own mirror." He sealed the laboratory with wax and wrote in his report, "A temple of heresy, gilded with blasphemy." Soon after, Girolamo's apprentices were seized. The city's rumor mills turned faster than its mills of grain. It was said that during the plague, the alchemist had drained the blood of corpses for his elixirs. Others swore he had summoned spirits through boiling mercury and the tears of his lover. Under torture, one apprentice broke. Between screams, he confessed that human ingredients had been used, that the elixir's perfection required the essence of the dead. The inquisitors needed no further proof. Father Manfredi requested the presence of Isabella. She was escorted to Santa Maria Novella, her hands bound though her garments were silk. The friar greeted her not with courtesy, but with curiosity, as if studying a rare beast. "Do you deny," he asked, "that you aided Girolamo in works against the natural order?" She trembled, but said nothing. He continued, "Your silence is confession. Your tears, proof of possession." When she finally lifted her gaze, her eyes were red-rimmed and cold. "If it is a crime to love," she said, "then you will find me guilty beyond redemption." Manfredi made the sign of the cross. Love does not distill mercury from flesh. But Florence was already convinced. In taverns and palaces alike, her name became an echo of the forbiddens. Mothers warned their daughters, "Beware the woman who made gold from sin." The Medici, anxious to prove their loyalty to Rome, allowed the trial to proceed. The city would be purified by confession or by fire. Manfredi ordered the exhumation of Girolamo's earlier works. Among them, fragments of parchment inscribed with phrases both scientific and sacrilegious. The soul can be weighed. The divine hides in decay. To the friar, it was the handwriting of Lucifer. When he read Girolamo's final entry, "Death is only a door," he whispered. "Then let him walk through it." By decree of the church, the alchemist was charged with heresy, necromancy, and unnatural transmutation. Isabella was named his accomplice. Their trial would take place in the hall of the Signoria, a theater of salvation and spectacle. Florence buzzed with anticipation. Merchants postponed business. Nobles reserved seats. Heresy was entertainment when wrapped in gold and scandal. On the night before the trial, Father Manfredi prayed before the crucifix. He whispered, "Lord, grant me strength to burn out corruption, even if it glitters." Outside, in the narrow streets, the scent of mercury lingered. And in her cell, Isabella pressed her hands to the cold stone wall and thought she could hear it, the faint, rhythmic beat of Girolamo's heart, pulsing still through the city that would soon destroy them both. The hall of the Signoria glowed with candlelight, hundreds of flames trembling beneath frescoes of saints who had once endured their own trials. Tonight, Florence came to witness another kind of martyrdom. Girolamo di Rossi stood at the center, shackled, his once white robe stained with rust-colored blotches. His eyes, hollow yet unbroken, searched the crowd, not for mercy, but for her. Behind a thin veil sat Isabella. The court forbade her presence, yet her family's rank demanded it. She had not spoken since her arrest. Her silence had become its own testimony. Father Manfredi opened the proceedings with the voice of Scripture. Before God and Florence, we summon the alchemist Girolamo di Rossi, accused of heresy, necromancy, and the perversion of nature. The hall murmured. Even those who believed in his guilt leaned forward, captivated. Girolamo's lips parted. "I sought only truth," he said softly. "If truth is heresy, then all scholars are damned." The inquisitor slammed his staff. "Truth does not boil in cauldrons of blood." From the benches, nobles gasped, whispering. Girolamo did not bow. "Blood is life," he replied. "And I sought life eternal." The phrase hung in the air like incense. To prove his guilt, Manfredi ordered the display of confiscated items, vials filled with cloudy metal, pages describing the transformation of flesh into spirit. One parchment bore an emblem, a circle entwined with a serpent, the symbol of alchemy. "Behold," cried the friar, "his false Eucharist." Laughter rippled through the audience, sharp and cruel. But Isabella saw only the man she had once loved bent beneath the weight of chains heavier than sin. When the torturer stepped forward, dragging a rack of iron, the hall fell silent. Manfredi turned to Girolamo. "Confess, and the fire may spare your soul." Girolamo's answer was a whisper, yet it carried through the chamber. "I would rather burn for truth than kneel for lies." They stripped his shirt, binding his wrists to the wooden frame. As the wheel turned, bones strained against flesh. A single cry escaped him, raw, human, defiant. Isabella rose involuntarily, her veil slipping. "Stop!" the hall turned. Her voice shattered the ritual silence like glass. "Enough!" She cried again. "He is no servant of the devil, I am." Gasps erupted. The inquisitor froze mid-motion. Girolamo's head lifted weakly. "No," he mouthed, but the word was lost in the roar of voices. She stepped forward, trembling yet resolute. "It was I who gave him what you call blasphemy. My blood, my love, my soul." Father Manfredi's face blanched. "You admit to witchcraft?" "I admit," she said, her voice breaking, "to love that defied death." The crowd surged with murmurs, fascination, horror, awe. In that instant, she had both condemned and sanctified him. Girolamo's eyes glistened with tears, but not of despair. For the first time he smiled. "Then we are one," he whispered. Manfredi raised the crucifix. "You shall both answer before God." The friar's voice echoed over the chaos, sealing their fate. "Tomorrow the judgment shall be pronounced. Florence will see that even gold burns." As the torches dimmed, the hall emptied. Only ashes, whispers, and the scent of mercury remained. And from behind the veil of incense and fear, Isabella watched him carried away, his body broken, but his spirit unyielding, knowing the trial had only begun. The morning broke with the tolling of church bells, slow, deliberate, and heavy as judgment. Florence awoke to the promise of confession, though no soul expected salvation. Isabella was brought before the tribunal at dawn. Her wrists bore faint bruises from the night before. Her gown was the color of ashes. She looked less like a noblewoman and more like a relic already sanctified by suffering. Father Manfredi regarded her with the detached curiosity of a surgeon. "The court requests," he said, "that you speak truth before God, lest your soul remain bound to darkness." She lifted her head. Her voice was steady, eerily calm. "My truth is already written in another's blood." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The friar gestured for silence. "You stand accused of aiding Girolamo di Rossi in the practice of forbidden arts, of corruption, heresy, and murder. What say you?" She took a breath, as if inhaling centuries of guilt. "I say I loved him." Gasps. The scribes hesitated, their quills hovering mid-air. "I loved him," she repeated, "as one loves light in a world built for shadows. And if love is a heresy, then I am its most faithful disciple." Father Manfredi frowned. "Love cannot justify abomination." Isabella's gaze flickered toward Girolamo, who stood restrained behind a screen of iron bars. His face was pale, but his eyes burned with something that refused extinction. "He taught me," she continued, "that the soul is not confined to flesh, that what God separates, love may rejoin. We sought not gold, Father, but the alchemy of the Spirit, to bind what even death could not divide." The friar's knuckles whitened around his crucifix. "And yet your quest cost a man his life. The Duke lies in his tomb with poison in his veins." "How do you answer that?" Her lips trembled. We did not seek his death. But when one plays with the essence of creation, the line between healing and harm dissolves like mercury in wine. I carry that sin, not he. She turned toward Girolamo. You told me love was eternal, she said softly. I only wish to prove you right. Tears welled in his eyes, unseen by most, but recorded forever in the mind of every witness present. The scribe's quill resumed scratching. Each word she spoke became history, a paradox of devotion disguised as guilt. Father Manfredi leaned forward. You would have us believe your actions were acts of love, not sorcery? She smiled faintly. Tell me, Father, when Christ turned water into wine, was that not alchemy too? The hall erupted. Some shouted blasphemy. Others whispered awe. Even the guards hesitated, uncertain whether they were witnessing damnation or something divine. Manfredi slammed his staff. Enough! You twist scripture into sin. I twist nothing, she said. I only confess what you fear, that the desire to touch eternity lives in all of us. The friar's voice dropped to a whisper. You have sealed your fate. So be it, Isabella answered. If fire purifies, then let it find the truth in our ashes. The tribunal rose. The verdict was already written, but the moment lingered, suspended between horror and holiness. As they led her away, Girolamo reached through the bars, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest instant. No words were needed. The silence between them was the final confession, one the church could never transcribe. The square of Santa Croce was already crowded before dawn. The air smelled of smoke and incense, as if the city itself wished to disguise the scent of what was about to burn. Girolamo di Rossi, the Medici's fallen alchemist, stood at the center of the scaffold, bound in chains, his garments soaked in oil, his face calm in a way that terrified even the guards. The church called it purification. The people called it justice. Only Isabella, veiled among the crowd, called it love dying in daylight. The pyre was surrounded by the very instruments Girolamo had once used in his laboratory: crucibles, alembics, glass vials refracting the light like jewels. The inquisitors had arranged them deliberately, mocking his faith in false transmutation. Father Manfredi stepped forward, reading aloud the sentence. Girolamo di Rossi, found guilty of heresy, alchemical corruption, and communion with infernal arts, shall be cleansed by holy fire, that his soul may be returned to God. Girolamo lifted his head, his voice low yet steady. I sought only the perfection of matter, he said. And if perfection is blasphemy, then creation itself is sin. The friar made the sign of the cross. May the flames reveal your folly. When the torch touched the wood, the first crackle sounded like breath. Then came the roar, fierce, consuming, alive. The fire rose in waves, licking the glass vessels until they glowed red, then white. For an instant, the instruments reflected Girolamo's face multiplied 100-fold, as if 1,000 versions of the man were watching themselves dissolve. The crowd gasped as molten gold began to drip from the pyre, pooling at the base of the scaffold. It shimmered like blood in the morning light. Some whispered it was the elixir, his final transmutation, achieved at the moment of death. Others swore they saw his shadow resist the flame, standing long after the flesh was gone. Isabella's knees buckled. She fell among the crowd, her veil slipping, revealing the pale silver lines along her wrists, the marks left by Mercury's slow kiss. The people recoiled as if she were contagious. Soldiers rushed forward, dragging her from the square. Burn her too! Someone shouted. The witch who drank from his vials. But Father Manfredi raised his hand. No, he said coldly. The fire has taken the alchemist. Let the woman live, so she may remember. That mercy was its own kind of punishment. Days later, the Medici decreed her confinement to the convent of Santa Lucia, a place for noble women whose sins could not be spoken of. There would be no trial, no further spectacle, only silence. When she arrived, her clothes still carried the faint scent of smoke. The sisters led her through long stone corridors lit by oil lamps, their eyes avoiding hers. In the chapel, she knelt before the crucifix and whispered a prayer that was neither to God nor to heaven. At night, she dreamed of the furnace. In her sleep, she saw Girolamo's face within the flames, not in agony, but in revelation. She smelled mercury again, metallic and sweet, curling through the darkness like a lover's breath. The next morning, when she looked at her hands, she thought the veins shimmered faintly under the skin. Outside, Florence celebrated its victory over sin. The church declared the plague subdued, the heresy cleansed. Yet for those who had witnessed the pyre, the image of gold flowing from human ash could not be forgotten. They said the curse of the alchemist did not die that day. It merely changed form, from fire into memory, from body into soul. The convent of Santa Lucia stood on a hill beyond the Arno, its walls white as bone against the Tuscan sky. Inside, time did not pass. It decayed slowly, like fruit left too long in the sun. The sisters moved through its cloisters in silence, speaking only in prayer. And even prayer here was a kind of penance. Isabella d'Aragona was given a narrow cell facing east. The window was barred with iron, the light weak and filtered through dust. Her bed was straw. Her only possessions, a rosary and a small book of psalms. The air smelled faintly of wax and vinegar, the scent of sanctity or perhaps of preservation. On her first night, she heard the bells toll midnight and thought she could still smell smoke. The ghost of the furnace followed her even here. When she closed her eyes, she saw the shimmer of molten gold and heard Girolamo's final words, not spoken aloud, but carved somewhere inside her bones. In the weeks that followed, her body began to betray her. The faint silver traces on her skin deepened, spreading along her arms like veins of quicksilver. Her lips sometimes bled without reason. Her reflection in the convent's wash basin seemed paler each morning, as though the mercury that once danced through the alchemist's vials now coursed through her. The sisters whispered about her. "She glows when the candles go out," said one. "Her prayers sound like chanting in a tongue not heard since Eden," said another. To them, Isabella became both warning and miracle, a living relic of sin, an emblem of divine punishment. She accepted the role in silence. During prayer, she knelt until her knees bruised. During confession, she said nothing at all. Her sins were beyond the reach of forgiveness. Yet in her solitude, she wrote. By candlelight, she tore scraps from her psalm book and filled them with letters to Girolamo. Letters she hid within the bindings of devotional texts, where no one would look. "My beloved," she wrote, "your flame still burns within me. They call it poison, but I know it as devotion. I drink the memory of your hands each night, and in that memory, I live again." The ink shimmered faintly where it dried, as if touched by something metallic. Months blurred into years. Florence changed outside the convent walls, wars, plagues, and revolts. But within, time remained an unbroken circle. Isabella's health withered. Her hair turned white far too soon, her voice thin as smoke. Still, she lingered, her body neither fully alive nor ready for death. Sometimes, the abbess found her staring at the crucifix with a strange serenity. "He was my God," Isabella whispered once. "And I his sacrifice." The abbess crossed herself and left quickly, muttering prayers for protection. But late at night, when all the lamps were extinguished, the sisters swore they saw a pale glow from Isabella's cell, a silver halo that pulsed faintly like breath. She was no longer praying for redemption. She was remembering, transmuting memory into matter, grief into ritual. Her love, like mercury, refused to evaporate. In her final winter, she stopped speaking altogether. The last letter she wrote was hidden behind the convent altar, sealed with wax and tears. It ended simply, When the furnace is cold, the soul still burns. Wait for me, Girolamo. In silence, I am still yours. The day she could no longer rise from her bed, the sisters gathered to pray. The silver in her veins gleamed faintly beneath her skin, a saint's relic in the making. And as her breath faded, the air filled again with that scent, sharp, metallic, unmistakable, mercury, the mark of the alchemist's lover. In the spring of 1494, Florence trembled beneath rebellion. The Medici had fallen. Banners burned above the palaces they once ruled. The streets rang with psalms of vengeance, the smell of smoke thick in the wind. For most, it was the end of tyranny. For Isabella d'Aragona, it was simply the end. The Sisters of Santa Lucia prayed as cannon fire echoed beyond the walls. The convent trembled, dust falling like ash from the rafters. Within her narrow cell, Isabella sat upright for the first time in weeks. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, the veins beneath her flesh glowing faintly like filigree of silver. From her rosary she drew a hidden object, a small vial, cloudy with age. It was the last thing Girolamo had ever given her, secreted away before his death. Within it swirled a faint golden liquid, sluggish and luminous, as though alive. She turned it in her hands and whispered, "You waited." Outside, a church bell shattered under bombardment. The sound was like glass breaking, a final alchemical note. She opened her psalm book one last time. Between the pages was the final letter she had written to him years before. The words were faded but legible. "If death is the true philosopher's stone, then let it refine us into what we were meant to be." Her fingers trembled as she uncorked the vial. The scent of it filled the room, metallic, sweet, and warm, like blood touched by sunlight. She raised it to her lips. In that moment, the world seemed to still. Her last prayer was not to God but to memory. "Girolamo," she whispered, "complete the work." She drank. The sisters found her hours later, seated as though in meditation. The vial lay empty beside her. They called her name, but she did not stir. Her body was cold, yet untouched by decay. Her skin gleamed faintly, waxen, her lips tinged gold. Terrified, the abbess ordered her cell sealed. "No one must speak of this," she said. "The devil claims his due." But rumors spread faster than commandments. They said her body did not rot, that when light touched her, she shone faintly, like a statue cast from living metal, that her room smelled forever of mercury and roses. When the fires of rebellion consumed Florence, the convent itself burned. The sisters fled, but the sealed cell remained intact. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell, the language of alchemy fading into myth. Then, in 1783, during renovations of an old chapel, masons uncovered a frescoed wall. Behind it lay a hidden recess lined with flasks, manuscripts, and one sealed chamber. Inside, a figure sat upon a straw bed, preserved perfectly, her skin pale as ivory, her eyes closed in eternal calm. At her feet, the workers found the alchemist's journals, pages filled with symbols of gold, mercury, and salt. Diagrams of human hearts beside furnaces. The last entry, in Girolamo's hand, read, "Love is the final element. It transforms without end." The discovery was hushed by the church. The vials were never opened, the body never moved. Scholars who viewed it described an unexplainable shimmer that clung to the air. One swore he smelled the faint sweetness of burning gold. The legend endured of the alchemist and his lover, whose pursuit of eternity defied both science and salvation. Some say the curse was alchemical, others divine. But those who have studied their writings know the truth. The curse was never supernatural. It was the hunger that defines humankind, to love beyond the limits of flesh and to master what should never be mastered.